can't say I'm surprised to hear that companies fail to report. Maybe they fail to report in a timely manner. Maybe they fail to report anything. In far too many cases, Target comes to mind. We find out about the fact that they've been hacked by people who find out about the fact that all this customer information is available in the black market.
Right.
Is it possible that a hack on the scale of a Sony might be going unreported?
Well, it's interesting that some of these companies are finding out from the media that they've been hacked, or finding out from the government that they've been hacked. The worst case for a company is to find out you've been hacked when your system stops working, which we saw in some of these cases. So in many cases, when they discover they're hacked, they're not reporting for various reasons. We want to break down those barriers. We want to improve the communication between the government and the private sector in this area. It's absolutely critical that we have the information necessary to address this threat, and we're asking companies to share their information with us.
And Leo, one thing I wanted to ask you about as well is we've reported on the J.P. Morgan breach, which your office is obviously investigating, that one of the things the bank really wanted was a national security exemption letter. And how common is that for companies to ask for exemptions from disclosing?
What is that?
Well, under certain state laws that require disclosure, there are exemptions to the requirement. And
Meaning J.P. Morgan didn't want to report that they had a hack?
I won't talk about the J.P. Morgan case in particular, but in general, state laws often require that companies report certain types of breaches with certain exemptions. One of the exemptions is if there is a law enforcement need to keep the breach quiet, keep it close hold so we can continue to investigate. In most cases, that's not necessary, and it's very rare that we issue what is a hold harmless letter or ask the Department of Justice to issue a hold harmless letter to a company so that they don't have to disclose it. So without having to refer to a particular investigation, which is ongoing, I'll just say in general terms, it is a rare thing.
A rare thing to be asked for and a rare thing to grant as well.
Both are rare.
Yeah. Well, what's the threshold for granting one of those letters?
Well, we'd have to show an investigative need. So, for example, if the adversary is still on a network and we want to monitor the adversary on the network, we'd like to keep that information from the public so the adversary obviously doesn't. We're not telegraphing to the adversary what we're doing and what we're watching. So in those types of cases, we'd ask that they not make the public disclosure under state law.
If these companies seem to be understaffed or unprepared for these hacks, does your office have the right amount of funding and staffing to get what you need done?
Well, funding and staffing is always a challenge. It's not just a challenge for the private sector. It's a big challenge for the FBI as well. As we build our capacity, we're finding that the threat is growing as fast or faster than our capacity to address it. So,
but do you have the expertise even? I mean, it just seems that this is such a quick, fast-moving target.
It is difficult to keep up with. The technology is changing, the landscape is changing, the threat activity is changing. We're seeing more and more sophisticated actors enter this landscape. So the expertise is rare, and it is difficult to hire, train, and retain. We are competing with the private sector. We're competing with other government agencies. We think we have a lot to offer in terms of professional satisfaction, service to the country. We distinguish ourselves in that sense in terms of the FBI hiring process. But we still have a hard time finding the right people and keeping the right people.
What does it mean practically if you can't keep up with a growing threat? Your ability to enforce the laws, but does it mean that crooks are getting away?
It does mean that. I think the reality is if we are not paying more attention to this problem, we will see the threat increase and our ability to keep up with it not keeping pace. It's undeniable that the number of breaches is going up, that the sophistication level is going up. And despite our best efforts, we are constantly surprised by new and innovative ways to affect these important networks.
And Leo, I've heard breach investigations described between federal law enforcement and companies as they can be a hostage situation in many cases. That, we reported that there were some delays in J.P. Morgan turning over data related to its breach to the FBI. And we had one person tell us that, these situations can often devolve into what amount to a hostage situation over data. How common is that?
So that's a good point, and the question really should be, how does the private sector work with the government when they have a breach? And the FBI and the Secret Service have done a great job over the last few years in changing our tactics so that we have the least negative impact on a company when we show up. So, for example, if there is sensitive information on a network that the company is concerned about disclosing, we're very sensitive to those needs, and we'll work around that. We can compartmentalize the information we need and take only what's necessary for the investigation. So, in that sense, we are listening very carefully to what the private sector requires in order to break down the barriers to cooperation.
Sure. I also wanted to ask you about attribution as well. I mean, to go back to the JP Morgan example, just because it's its freshest, you have a lot of ex-military folks, very senior folks inside private sector corporations now, who have a lot of experience in attributing attacks on government networks. And we reported that the JP Morgan senior cybersecurity leadership believed this was a Russian state-sponsored attack. The FBI determined it wasn't. How often do you see that? I mean, are you seeing a lot more of that now with more of these senior military folks inside companies attributing information without access to the resources that the FBI has?
That's not a trend that I'm noticing, and certainly not something that we would be tracking. There's a lot of cyber talent out there. The Department of Defense is generating a lot of cyber talent. And if they have a certain viewpoint, it may shade, but we don't see that, and I haven't seen that in any of the cases that I work.
Leo, in the case of JP Morgan, hackers got alarmingly far into the company's networks. What we haven't seen thus far is an attack on financial markets themselves. How close, what does the FBI know? How close have hackers, whether they be criminals, right, trying to make a profit, or nation states trying to disrupt this country's economy, come to penetrating and messing with the integrity of America's financial markets?
Well, we have seen some activity that is troubling.
Such as what?
Well, General Clapper, the DNI, the other day, for the first time disclosed that Iran was behind the attack on the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. So we see yet another nation state not just trying to create an annoyance and get attention, but actually conducting an attack that was destructive in nature. So I think that we would be well served to prepare for, I won't say a catastrophic attack, but an attack that has an impact that may shake some of the confidence levels necessary.
Could be on the stock market, bond market, currency markets.
Those are very, very well protected systems, and it would be extremely hard.
But we thought JP Morgan was well protected too.
These are
spend $250 million a year.
I agree that we're always surprised. But what we have to keep in mind is that most of these payment systems and trading systems are closed systems. They're not open to the internet. The biggest threat is when you're open to the internet or when you're open to a third-party vendor that's open to the internet. So if you have a closed network that you can monitor and detect intrusions or keep an eye on better because it's not connected by email or otherwise, it's easier to protect a system like that. And I think that's what most of our infrastructure is composed of, but we have to actually be very vigilant about it. It's a concern for us.
What's been the most shocking hack for you?
Well, obviously the Sony hack has really changed the way many of us think about it. That had three very, very scary elements to it. First of all, there was the theft of intellectual property, which we can understand from a financial point of view some hackers would engage in, but also the extortion that came after and the destructive nature of the attack really changed the minds. And this has been publicly attributed to North Korea. So when you have a sovereign state conducting an attack against a private network with that much impact, it really did raise some concern. The administration came out publicly, the FBI came out publicly, and we are very, very concerned about that type of activity.
Last one for you. Is the amount of security technology that is inside private sector companies, does that help or hurt your investigations? There's a lot of data being generated by a lot of different vendors. And we talked to a lot of companies that say, we don't know how to make heads or tails of a lot of this information.
Right. Part of
the
challenge in these investigations is the complexity of the networks. Many of the folks that we visit after an attack don't know what's connected to their network. They don't know their network topology. They don't know who's on their network. Some cybersecurity technology claims to address that, but no protection is perfect. It requires continuous monitoring. Actually, the notion that you can protect your perimeter is falling by the wayside. The best organizations out there are monitoring. They are detecting what's on their network before it becomes a major impact.
But for you, the bottom line is you want companies, you want general counsels to feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling you. You're not going to come in with a bunch of yellow tape and sort of cordon off a crime scene.
That's right. When we respond, it's not with raid jackets and evidence tape. We are working with companies. We want them to call us. We want them to have a plan, and we want to be part of that plan.